Hello, friends, and thank you as always for visiting the Legend Sports Universe YouTube channel, Legend Sports Universe, where legends play forever. We have reached June of year 4 of the Franchise Stars Baseball League, and that means we have reached the year 4 FSBL Rookie Draft. Again, to set this up for everybody, if you are not familiar with the Franchise Stars Baseball League setup, it's Franchise Stars with a twist. Rather than everybody being loaded up with all their best players from the start, this is built with a career mode, franchise mode in mind. Every franchise had a 100-player master pool from which they could draw from. Year 1, each team began with 40 players taken at random from that 100-player list. Some teams got a great initial draw, some teams got a terrible initial draw and had to hope for good guys to come in down the line. The remaining 60 players come into the FSBL, 4 at a time from that remaining 60-player pool. Plus, each franchise gets one random Negro Leaguer from history added to them in each year's rookie draft. So 5 new players for each team, and that is the setup. So let's get to it. The year 4 rookie draft in the FSBL. So we will go by division and we will open up with the National League East and the Atlanta Braves. The Braves in the FSBL this season have seen their offense suddenly surge. Ronald Acuna back from an injury a year ago. Dale Murphy playing better. Wally Berger having a great year. So the offense is starting to come around a bit for the Braves, who have been able to pitch as you would expect through the first 4 years. This draft gives them another solid outfielder in Sid Gordon, a couple-time All-Star. It also gives them another guy in the first base rotation, Earl Torgeson. First base has been a weakness for the Braves to this point. Earl Torgeson was a decent hitter in the 40s, I believe it was, for the Braves. He was a walk machine. He drew over 100 walks a few times back then. So Torgerson might be a guy who can find his way onto this roster. Lefty reliever Tom House will also be a guy who can factor in here for the Braves down the line. Gene Moore was an all-star a couple times as well. But the Negro League pick for the Braves here is a really solid one. Switch hitting catcher Quincy Troop. Bobby Lopez hasn't quite performed expectations. Still, Crandall's only been around for a year and change, so he may develop. But Troop is again, a switch hitting catcher, handles both sides solidly, both offensively and defensively. Not great at either, but very solid at both. Also, just another one of these Negro League guys with just an interesting career. He left the Negro Leagues multiple times to play basketball and then to be a boxer where he was a Gold Gloves champion. He actually ended up making the majors playing for the Indians, and he was something like 39 years old when he broke into the majors. Um, and fellow Bob Feller was a big fan of his and felt that Trout would have been a very, very strong major league catcher had he been there from the get-go. But he's going to be a guy who's going to play into things for the Braves down the line. He's going to overtake either Crandall or Lopez, I would have to think, sometime in the next year or so. So we move on to the Montreal Expos, and the Expos had a legend, a bona fide legend. Check out the bottom of the list, the Negro League entry for the Montreal Expos, Oscar Charleston. The first 8 years of Oscar Charleston's Negro League career are just a black ink extravaganza on Baseball Reference. Hitting over 400, on base percentage over 500, slugging over 700, a thousand plus OPS every year. His career OPS plus in the Negro Leagues was 184. That is an astronomical number. Charleston also has flexibility for the Expos, which comes up huge for them because Charleston, though he's primarily thought as an outfielder, and he was, center fielder is his primary position. If he played enough games at first base over the course of his career that he is going to be rated to be able to play first base as well for Montreal, that could prove very, very big for the Expos, who have not had a great turn at first base. Nick Johnson, Mike Jorgensen, Adam LaRoche, if you can plug Oscar Charleston in there at first base, you still have Andre Dawson, Larry Walker in your outfield. I mean, Larry Walker, Bryce Harper. Forget Larry Walker's with the Rockies. Bryce Harper. But I mean, obviously, the idea of starting an outfield of Charleston, Dawson, and Harper is appealing. But for the Expos' purposes, it might actually make more sense for them to have Charleston playing first base. So we'll see how that shakes out. But Charleston, just an absolute legend and an instant improvement for the Montreal Expos, much as the Blue Jays did last year when when Josh Gibson was a rookie for them in year three. So Gibson was taken 2 years ago. Last year was his rookie year. So but it's the same kind of thing for the Expos. Obviously, a huge get there. Dennis Martinez, four-time All-Star. He won an ERA title. Denny Martinez, a very good, very solid pitcher. Um, Shane Andrews adds nothing for them at third base, which continues to be a fairly weak position. Although they have Ryan Zimmerman there, and Zimmerman has played pretty well. They had a couple of relievers in Mel Rojas, who of course gave agita to many an Expos fan for a long time. Rojas had some good years, but he also blew a lot of big moments for them. And Elias Sosa, who was a very solid reliever. Also, Sosa near the end of his career was throwing 60 or 70 appearances out of the bullpen for them. He was getting, 12 to 15 decisions a year. He was getting a bunch of wins, a bunch of losses too, but a bunch of wins for those Expos teams out of the bullpen. So overall, I mean, Oscar Charleston alone makes it a great draft for the Expos, but a very solid draft for the Expos, who kind of surprised in years one and two of the FSBO and have actually fallen off since then. Charleston gives them an instant thrust back into contention for a postseason berth. Next, we head down to Florida and take a look at the Florida Marlins. The Marlins, the Marlins don't have a great pool, so it's hard to gauge their draft. There's no standout in this. AJ Ramos was an all-star reliever. Jazz Chisholm was an all-star 1 year at second base. He can also give you a little bit of defensive versatility. He'll be able to play outfield a little bit for them. Pablo Lopez was an all-star 1 season. He was kind of evolving with those bad Marlins teams of the early 2020s before moving on to the Twins. Kyle Barraclough had a couple, for one thing, a very cool name, but also he had a couple good years as a reliever a few years ago, but then he ended up with some injury issues and was never able to reclaim his form. And now, I mean, he may be down in the minors, but as far as I know, he's out of baseball entirely. Perhaps the best pick here, and this happens a lot with Negro League players, where the one of the problems with the Negro Leagues is that everybody wanted so badly to give these guys all the credit for all the slights and everything. And understandably so, and certainly with merit in one way, but in another way, it kind of started to become where all these guys were supposedly great. And if you read up on a guy like this, like Jimmy Crutchfield, everybody says Jimmy Crutchfield was a line drive hitter. He was the Black Lloyd Wayner. He was, terrific line drive hitter, could hit for average and all that kind of stuff. But his minor league stats, now that we've entered these stats and we insisted on putting these stats in the record book as official and treating them as the major leagues, well, then the stats are what we're going to go by. And the stats say that Jimmy Crutchfield was a below average offensive player, significantly. His OPS plus was 76. Um, so, again, we don't get to pick and choose. If we're going to say that their stats are legitimate and put them merit wise ahead of Major League Baseball, well, then we hold them to the stats that are presented in front of us, even when it doesn't live up to the legend. And Crutchfield is a guy that happens with. He was, by all accounts, a very, very good defender. Obviously, I'm not going to hold him to defensive stats of the era in the same fashion. So he will be a very solid outfielder. He will have some speed. He can run a bit. but he's not going to be a terrific offensive player. But again, for the Marlins overall pool just isn't that strong. Their outfield is not very strong right now, with the exception of Gary Sheffield, who's tearing it up. So Crutchfield is a guy who could potentially make an impact pretty quickly for the Marlins. Next, we move on to the New York Mets, and the Mets draft definitely impacted by how things have gone for them this year because the Mets bullpen, other than Jesse Orosco and Pedro Feliciano, has been atrocious this season, and it's absolutely killed the Mets in the NL East here in year four of the FSBL. So they take Gary Gentry as a starter. He's the best overall player among those guys. Gentry was an above average starter, a nice, solid depth starter, but the Mets really have good depth already in their rotation. They've already got Seaver, and they've got Kuzman, and they've got Syndergaard, and they've got Leiter involved in that, and Sid Fernandez. So they've got a whole bunch of solid guys at starter. I'm not sure Gentry really cracks that. But three relievers taken in the draft. Randy Myers, the highest ceiling of that lot. Randall Kay could certainly help that pen. Also gives them a solid lefty. Ray Sadecki comes on to the squad as well. Sadecki, another solid relief pitcher for the Mets, another left-hander. So they had two lefties in Myers and Sadecki, and then the man with the wicked slider, and who is also a bit off of his rocker. But Turk Wendell. Wendell was great on those late 90s Mets. Um, Used to chew Mark McGuire up on just a regular basis. Um, but so the Mets opt for three relievers in the draft, and it is conceivable that all three of those guys could impact the Mets when year five rolls around here in the FSBL. Marcelino Guerra, a fairly nondescript Negro Leaguer, outfield first baseman guy. He doesn't really stand to make much of an impact, but again, some of those guys, it's the way a lot of the Negro Leaguers work in guys like that who aren't the studs like Charleston is they're rated for their average statistics, but they're given the potential of their peak. So some of those guys start. You have a lot of guys in Negro League history, again, if you're going by the stat record, who may have had like one really good season or two really good seasons and overall just weren't particularly good. But those guys are going to end up with a fairly high ceiling, and then it's up to kind of the development algorithm and do things break right for them where they come close to that peak. And so a guy like Guerra may be somebody who ends up developing to that point, but he's not going to be part of the real long-term thing. And again, I just don't think Gentry fits into the rotation, barring injuries and stuff like that. The relief pitchers are going to be the big impact for the Mets out of this draft. Hard for the Phillies to match their draft of last year when they added the great Pete slash Grover Cleveland Alexander to the rotation and added Chase Utley as well to the roster. But this is another solid draft for the Phils up top, and particularly in the outfield. Bobby Abreu, of course, leads the way there. I'm not a fan of the Abreu Hall of Fame candidacy, but Bobby Abreu was a just a such a professional hitter. He used to kill the Mets. Um, but just a guy who got on base a lot, could run, hit for a good average, had some power. One of the worst Gold Glove decisions in history, but the Gold Glove is kind of a joke. I kind of think everybody knows that. But I mean, a lifetime OPS plus 128, lifetime 291 hitter, and on base percentage just shy of 400. The guy stole 30 plus bags several times. If I remember right, he stole 41 year. So I mean, Abreu, a very, very good pickup here for the Phillies. And you could put him into that DH spot. What they've been doing now is they don't really have much in the way of somebody who's been set in left field. They've kind of been going with Ashburn or sliding Billy Hamilton. Um, as one of them's playing center, one of them's DHing. Chuck Klein has right field locked down, and then you've got Sherry McGee, who's been very good out there. playing left, DHing sometimes. Ashburn sits against lefties, et cetera, et cetera. Abreu can definitely get himself into that outfield mix with that crew there. Dave Cash, solid player, three-time All-Star. The Cash doesn't really have any room at the end with the Phillies, so that pick, I'm just Dave Cash just kind of is going to have to wait for an injury to happen or something to open up. Um, John Titus was a very good turn of the century outfielder, another one of those 120 plus OPS plus guys. I just don't think that he really fits in given the depth that the Phillies have in the outfield right now. And Abreu is a better player than Titus. So Abreu gets the move ahead of him there. But Titus is a guy who'll be down in the minors and just have to wait and see if his number is called. He'll sit down there with Paparel and Greg Lazinski and just kind of have to wait his turn or for a trade from a very deep Phillies outfield. So we move on to the NL Central and we will start our journey there with the Milwaukee Brewers. The Brewers who shot out of the gate here in year four, a terrific April that saw them on top of the Central. That was not to last, though. The Brewers bottomed out in May. Suddenly they couldn't pitch and they really couldn't hit. And that was the lack of offense in May was their real problem. Their pitching took a step forward this year. Rookie Teddy Higuera has been terrific out of the gate, and the Brewers are going to try to piggyback that here with their year four draft. Four-time All-Star Ben Sheets joins the fold, as well as Giovanni Gallardo. Gallardo was a solid starter who never quite reached the heights that it seemed like he was going to. He was solid, but it felt like he was always on the cusp of being more than solid and never quite got there. But he's still a guy who can fit into this Brewers rotation pretty solidly. Darryl Hamilton, a nice lefty bat off the bench, a very solid defensive outfielder. So he can find his way into that fourth or fifth outfielder slot here for the Brewers. Larry Augustine, a very mediocre starter who became a mediocre reliever. So he's not much of a gain there. Orville Singer, an outfielder who also played a little bit of second base in the Negro Leagues. No great shakes there. He's going to be another kind of depth guy in the minors. But the Sheets edition, certainly a good pick and fits the direction that the Brewers have seemed like they've been trying to go. We move on to St. Louis, and the Cardinals, of course, have been a huge story here in year four as they have just not been able to get it going 2 months into the season. And a team with as much talent as the Cardinals have, it just has not clicked for them in either terms of pitching or in terms of offense, despite the fact Johnny Mize is among the league leaders. In home runs. They're just not clicking. And this draft is not going to go, it's not a terrible draft, but it's not something that's really going to push the Cardinals forward. Pepper Martin, third baseman and outfielder, really more of an well, I guess he's kind of more you know what? He's listed there as a third baseman. I kind of feel like Pepper Martin, actually, if I remember, I think that's an error on my part. Martin played more outfield than he played third base, but he is capable of playing both of them. Led the league in stolen bases a few times. He was a couple-time All-Star. A nice, solid player, but not really an impact player. Jason Isringhausen will help that Cardinals bullpen. They've tried to bolster their bullpen. The bullpen, other than the back end of it, had kind of been a little bit of a struggle for them. Um, Chuck Taylor had struggled the past couple of years. He lost his closing job to Al Hrabosky. Hrabosky has been solid. Isringhausen, of course, was a closer for the Cardinals for 5 years. Became a reliever. He was part of that whole Generation K thing with the Mets when everybody got hurt. Isringhausen's the only one who was really able to salvage his career into anything. Charlie Gelbert is a defense first shortstop, but there's a rumor there's this guy named Ozzie Smith who kind of has that spot locked down. So Gilbert's really just kind of a base filler. Jason Mott can certainly help that bullpen. He was that closer for he had 40 saves one year. He was that closer for a couple of years. Mott can certainly help out that pen a bit. George Shively, a fairly run-of-the-mill, nondescript Negro League outfielder. He'll be there for depth purposes. Um, if I think the best this Cardinals draft goes for St. Louis is if Isringhausen becomes a real impact reliever for them. It's probably the biggest gain against Martin. Ken Boyer has been very good at third. He's not really going to play there. They have outfield depth. He's not really going to break through in the outfield. So there's just nobody who you say, wow, this is, on a franchise that has as many great players in their history as it does, there's just nobody there, um, you know, in that draft for the Cardinals who's going to really make a huge impact for St. Louis in year five. So we head to Chicago and the Cubbies have an interesting draft here. They go for a pair of starters, both guys who are going to have high ceilings, but both guys who have kind of shortcomings that don't necessarily tend to play well in a league like this. Larry Corcoran is an old dead baller, 19th century pitcher. Um, he was among the league leaders in strikeouts back then. He won an ERA title. Um, but guys from that era don't always translate well here. Even in the strikeouts, good for their era, it still doesn't always translate great. They tend to be a little bit too hittable to succeed in a setup like this. It can be done, but it's not a sure thing. So Corcoran, as solid a pitcher as he was, isn't going to be a lockdown guarantee. Carlos Zambrano, multiple time All Star, also had a very high ceiling. But Zambrano used to walk a ton of guys. That also tends to get pitchers into trouble in a league setting like this. So, again, two pitchers who could be very, very good for the Cubbies going forward, but neither of which are a sure thing. So we'll have to see how both of those play out before we can really judge this draft. Jody Davis, I was always a Jody Davis fan. Solid at the stick, threw runners out well. Jody Davis was a very, very fine catcher for the Cubbies. I like that pick. Um, and the rest of that draft doesn't really have any kind of an impact. But that draft for the Cubs is really going to be determined. You're not going to know if that was a good draft for the Cubbies for a few years, probably 5, 6. When we get to like year 7 of this, we'll kind of see where Zambrano and Corcoran are, and that will kind of tell us how good a draft this was for Chicago. Certainly not a bad draft by any stretch. I think it's a solid draft that could end up being a very good one for the Cubs. We then head to Pittsburgh, and the Pittsburgh Pirates, our good friend Beatles eternally, hoping for another big name to follow up the pickup of Clemente last year. The Pirates have so many great guys in their history who haven't entered the FSBL yet. And he's going to have to wait another year because this draft doesn't bring any of those guys. No Wagner, no Trainer, no Kiner, and a bunch of others, obviously, who you can bring on. They do have Jesse Tannehill. Tannehill some similarities to Corcoran in terms of being an all-time pitcher. Tannehill pitched a little bit after Corcoran did, right? Early 1900s. Um, Tannehill was another guy. He won an ERA title. He's got a little bit of black ink on his ledger. He was an above-average pitcher. If they break right and Tannehill hits his peak, this could be a very good pickup. But the Pirates continue to kind of do it with mirrors. They still don't have all their great guys. Pitching has never been a strength, but the good pitchers who they have on the roster now are performing admirably. Deacon Phillip's been very good. Cannonball Ed Morris has been good. Babe Adams has been solid. So the Pirates are kind of piecing it together, and the fact that the rest of that NL Central just hasn't taken off, particularly with the Cardinals underperforming, the Pirates are still getting it done with the guys they have there. Josh Harrison. Harrison gives you some flexibility. He can play second and third. Um, Not a great bat, but a little bit of pop, a little bit of speed, doesn't walk a lot. He's kind of a run-of-the-mill kind of guy. Mace Brown as a reliever, again, a little bit above average reliever. Guys who can help, but there's not really a breakthrough guy there for the Pirates. But again, Pirates have been doing okay so far. And I've joked with Beatles. I've made this comment multiple times previously that there's going to be a draft coming down the line where the Pirates are just going to add like Wagner, Trainer, and Kiner in the same draft and turn the entire National League on its ear. But that year isn't this year. So the Pirates are kind of have to wait for some more thunder to come on through. But it has not slowed them down as they sit 2 months in to year four of the FSBL on top of the NL Central. We head to Cincinnati, and the Reds have put themselves into the thick of the playoff hunt 2 months into year four here for the first time as a threat. Their pitching has been really, really good this year, and that perhaps is what set up this draft where they don't go for pitching. They go for Frank Smith as a lower round pick, an average, adequate reliever, but their bullpen has been terrific as it is. So he's kind of not really a huge factor here. Tony Perez at third base is a huge get for multiple reasons. Obviously, a Hall of Famer, a 7-time All Star. Tony Perez was great. He can play both corners, which certainly helps the Reds as they've been a little bit spotty at both first base and third base so far. Perez displaces Heine Groh at third base, most likely. That'll move Pete Rose back out into left field. I mean, they've had Sean Casey and Frank McCormick at first base. You could have Perez replace them at first, keep Rose at third. Um, Depending on how the outfield plays. So you've got some options there if you're the Reds, and that a lot of that might end up playing into how the second best pick of this draft plays, and that's going to be the development of Bobby Tolan. Bobby Tolan was a 5 WAR player for like 3 years in the middle of his career, but he missed a season with injury. Um, but he was just trying to bring it up here on the monitor in front of me as I do this. 1970, Bobby Tolan hit 316. He had a 384 on base percentage. He hit 16 homers. He drove in 80. He stole 57 bases. He was thrown out of league most 20 times too. But like Olin was a threat. He could run. He had a little pop. He drew a few walks. Um, but after he had one good year after his injury season, he missed all of 1971. He still had a solid year in 72. And then after that, he kind of declined very quickly. But if Tolan plays to peak Tolan form, that helps the Reds out immensely because he definitely becomes a contributor in that outfield mix. Then you can keep Rose at third, put Perez at first, or DH somebody. Um, and it gives the Reds a lot more ground to grow with there. So the Perez pick is obviously a great one. Perez obviously will walk right into the starting lineup. And the Tolan pick could be impactful on things depending on how quickly and how far he progresses. Next, we head out to the NL West, and we start off with the LA Dodgers. The Dodgers, who were in first place in the West through the first month of the season, locked in a dogfight with the 2-time defending champion San Francisco Giants. But the Dodgers went in the tank in May. They had an 8-game losing streak. And actually, I believe that reached 9. That kind of has them drop back. But the Dodgers, they made the NLCS a year ago, and they have a good draft here. Pee Wee Reese will surely take over at shortstop. Bill Russell has been okay. He hasn't really done anything wrong, but Pee Wee Reese will walk into the shortstop spot for year 5. Oh, Hershiser, obviously a very good pickup. Hershiser's peak 3 or 4 years are outstanding, so his potential is going to be really high. But the Dodgers are loaded at pitcher, so Hershiser just kind of gives them more depth rather. The guy here, Jack Fournier, an OPS plus for his career of 142. First baseman primarily. He also played outfield a little bit. I'm not sure if he's going to qualify there. But Jack Fournier was a very, very good hitter who could find his way into this lineup. He's not going to play first base with Dan Brothers there, but he can certainly get some at bats off the bench and such, or play first and let Brothers DH. There are options there. Whit Wyatt, again, he's going to just kind of be a depth guy and a fairly nondescript Negro leaguer for the Dodgers there to pick up. But Pee Wee Reese, the 10-time All Star and Hall of Famer. I know there are people who don't think he should be a Hall of Famer, but the point is, Pee Wee Reese was a very, very good player, an excellent shortstop, a terrific base runner. and a captain. And the Dodgers will certainly be a better team with Pee Wee Reese manning the sixth spot on the defensive side of the ball. Realizing I went a little bit backwards in terms of the alphabet here in the West, as the Diamondbacks should have come before the Dodgers. I don't feel like going back and re-recording it, so the Diamondbacks will come here second. And the Diamondbacks draft a very good ad for the bullpen, Jose Valverde, their all-time leader in saves. If I remember correctly, he was a top five Cy Young guy for both the Diamondbacks and then when he went to the Tigers. So Valverde will help that pen behind the solid rotation that the Diamondbacks have already built. But the Diamondbacks' real problem is that they can't score. And nothing is done here to change that. Matt Davidson at third base is a nothing pickup. Felipe Lopez was a hugely touted Reds prospect who just never really panned out. Lopez, again, this is what happens with the last four expansion teams. Bottom guys in their top 100 pool are really, really low level guys. Lopez played for them for half a year and still is their eighth top second baseman in franchise history in terms of WAR. And since he wasn't going to amass enough points to make the Reds history at second base, that's why Lopez ends up with the Diamondbacks. Luke Weaver, a very middling starter for the Diamondbacks. He's not really going to break things there. Luke Weaver came back in prominence last year as a reliever for the Yankees, but he's not really going to have any impact for the D backs. And John Brown, I'm just going to mention John Brown. He's a very nondescript Negro leaguer, but we're going to mention John Brown because it speaks to something that I referenced before regarding Negro League history and stats and stuff like that. John Brown was an all-star in 1946, according to the stat record in Baseball Reference. He pitched in one game and he had one at bat as an outfielder and was somehow an all-star. And these are the kind of things that you see in trying to make the Negro League stats on par with Major League stats. It's just to put them on the same plane is intellectually dishonest. And that doesn't take anything away from your legends who would have been legends anywhere, whatever league they played in, whatever time. Your Josh Gibsons, your Oscar Charlestons. It's not a matter of that. But if you're again, like look at even somebody like Gibson, like the most at bats he had in a season, like wouldn't have even qualified in the majors. So it's just you have to take, if you're honest about it, you have to take all the Negro League stats and stories and stuff like that with a little bit of a grain of salt, particularly once you get past those top elite guys. And this example of John Brown is just another example that speaks to that in terms of the state record. If you are a fan of any other team in the National League other than the San Francisco Giants, this is going to make you cringe because the three-time National League pennant winners and the two-time defending world champions here in the FSBL just added Big Six Christy Mathewson. You knew it was kind of coming somewhere down the pike. The Giants have had all their success and they've had very, very solid pitchers. Carl Hummel, Tim Keith, Rube Marquard, all these guys, Joe McGinnity, like they have been starting very, very high end guys. Christy Mathewson is next level. 8 straight years leading the league in strikeout to walk ratio. 7 straight years and 8 of 9. His fielding independent pitching was the best in the league. His history record. He led the league in strikeouts 5 out of 6 years at his peak. He's the elite of the elite. And now and this is not to take away from any of those other pitchers that I mentioned, but the Giants are going to have an ace of aces leading that staff. And that is going to be very, very difficult for other teams in the National League to overcome this Giants juggernaut. They've been great. Now that they add Mathewson, it's just, again, it's another step. Jewett Meakin, Rod Beck will help. be another arm to put into that bullpen. The bullpen had been a little bit spotty this year. It has started to come around as of late as the Giants have surged and reclaimed that National League West. Art Fletcher, very a very nice player at shortstop, but this story for the Giants kind of begins and ends with Christy Mathewson. Um, yeah, th- th- if you're one of these other teams contending in the National League, your Phillies, the Dodgers, obviously, a team like the Pirates, and who have surged, even the Cardinals. I know the Cardinals are having a very rough go to start this year, but the Cardinals are going to have a run in them, and over the next few years, the Cardinals will return to form a bit. Um, but the rich get richer, and Christy Mathewson coming on to this Giants staff to lead that rotation is downright scary for every other team in the National League and the FSBL as a whole. Next, we head out to San Diego and the Padres, who just continue to struggle. They just don't have enough at this point. Their pitching has started. They got the Negro League duo Dave Brown and Nip Winters. They added Randy Jones last year. So they've started to put together a halfway decent pitching staff, and they try to bolster that here, adding to the bullpen with Heath Bell. Bell had a short peak, but was a terrific closer for 3 or 4 years. He was a multiple time All Star. He was a two-time Relief Man of the Year. So Bell is a nice pickup for the pen. Ed Whitson was a very middling starter. He had a nice long career. Whitson played, I think, it was like 15 years. The best of those coming with the Padres, but he was never a top guy. He was an all-star one year. Um, but his career, ERA plus is actually a tick below 100, so he's slightly below average for his career. So Whitson's not going to really be a big help. Rene Rivera at catcher, Jesus Guzman, nothing really from those guys. Eddie Miller wasn't a really prominent Negro League player. So adding Bell will help, but the Padres, after last year, after picking up Ken Caminiti last year to try to get that offense going a bit, they still need more help. They need Tony Gwynn in such a desperate way. They need Gwynn or Winfield on this team before they can ever even think about contemplating a wild card run. And right now, it is just not there for them. So the Bell edition is a nice one, but not something that's really going to impact the Padres in terms of the standings, I don't think. We will wrap up our run through the National League with the Colorado Rockies. Great pickup with their first pick. Nolan Arenado. Vinny Castilla has been disappointing at third base for the Rockies. Arenado will walk right in to that starting role next year for Colorado. Um, Great bat, great glove. So he's going to help the Rockies and that offense. They've already had a pretty good offensive haul so far. Um, Dante Bichette has underperformed, but I mean Larry Walker, Helton, Corey Tulowitzki, but they've got Matt Holliday, so they've got weapons on offense, and Arenado will add to that. The Rockies' big problem is that they can't pitch. That's no surprise to anybody. But that's where this team is struggling. Tyler Chatwood, if you remember, Chatwood, I guess it was probably his second or third year, had a really nice year for Colorado. And it looked like he was a guy who was going to turn the corner, and then he had an injury. I don't remember what it was, and he was just never able to reclaim that. So Chatwood may have a decent peak, but it's going to be really hard for him to get there because his average ratings, which are the starting ratings, are not going to be very good. Royce Clayton, Jamie Carroll, they can find their way onto this roster as depth guys. And the single named Carter, Negro Leaguer, rounds things out for the Rockies, who likely just won't be able to make any real progress until they can acquire some top flight pitching. We turn our attention to the American League and we'll start off in the East with the Toronto Blue Jays. The Blue Jays, of course, had a great draft. They had a couple of good drafts over the past couple of years. They got Josh Gibson, obviously, who has been a game changer for the Jays, but they've also bolstered their pitching. Pat Henkin, Hyunjin Ryu. Um, so and they got Andy Cooper in last year's draft. So again, the Negro League has helped the Blue Jays over the past couple of years with Cooper and Gibson. This year's pick, Charlie Spearman, a decent offensive catcher from the Negro Leagues. He's not really going to be an impact player, but he could certainly find his way onto the Major League roster. A couple of decent starters who could be a factor down the line. Esteban Loaiza had a very long, middling career. Ricky Romero was an all-star one year. Romero had a couple of decent seasons, but again, he wasn't really around as a force for that long. So both of those guys just kind of going to be depth guys, I figure is how they'll probably play out. But Jesse Barfield joining that outfield. Barfield certainly a good pickup, some power, a Gold Glover in the outfield as well. He's going to help, and Bo Bichette at shortstop could make situation interesting there. They've got Yunel Escobar and Tony Fernandez right now. Bichette has a bit more pop, um, so you could see a situation there where Bo Bichette makes a fairly quick impact for the Blue Jays. I think that's a pretty solid draft for Toronto. We then head to Baltimore and we'll check out the Orioles, and the Orioles pick up one of the Hall of Famers in this year's draft. Jim Palmer will join the Orioles rotation, and suddenly Baltimore is putting together a little something. Again, they started off this year, them in the American League and the Brewers in the National League both started off with great Aprils and both struggled in May. Um, the Orioles have a bit more going for them than the Brewers do. Again, the Orioles' disadvantage is just playing in the division they're in with the Yankees and the Red Sox. So the Orioles are going to need some things to break right. But the pitching has kind of been where the question mark for the Orioles has been. They've got Mike Mussina. The starters behind him have kind of been up and down, but now Palmer joining Mussina gives you a very, very nice 1-2 punch atop that Orioles rotation. So that's going to be a big help. The rest of the guys on there can fit in. Marty McManus, a decent second baseman. Tippy Martinez will help that Orioles bullpen um, out a bit. He'll probably help that bullpen out from the jump, actually. Red Cress at shortstop isn't really going to be much of a factor there. I don't think Javo Andrews, a Negro League outfielder, again, not a really impact guy. But Palmer certainly makes this draft a very good one for the Orioles. We then move on to the Tampa Bay Rays. And the Rays, again, and we've talked about this with the other teams that were in that last batch of expansion teams, there's just their player pools tend to not be overly deep. So you have to kind of take that into account. This isn't a bad draft for the Rays. Scott Kazmir can certainly break into that rotation. Again, Kazmir, super highly touted prospect, had some injury problems. The Mets dealt him in one of the dumbest trades in history to get Victor Zambrano. Um, but Kazmir never quite reached what people thought his peak was going to be, but he had a few very good seasons. He was an all-star multiple times. Good lefty arm. I think he helps the Rays a bit. Roberto Hernandez was a very solid reliever for a very long time. Hernandez is going to help the Rays immensely out of the bullpen. I like that pickup there. The Rays have also been very weak at shortstop. Jason Bartlett and Kevin Stalker and guys like that. Julio Lugo was not a superstar by any means, but Julio Lugo is better than those guys. So I think your top three picks there for the Rays are all guys who can impact the Rays in the near future. Again, that's not going to help them become a playoff team. They're a long way off from that. They're not going to be able to make a climb to that until free agency really becomes a significant thing here in the FSBL, and you're probably looking at year 6 before that really starts to become a factor. Um, but this will at least start getting the Rays a little bit closer. Again, all you can do if you're a franchise like the Rays in a league set up like this is just try to make some progress. And I think this draft does that for the Rays. We head to Boston, and this is a terrific draft for the Red Sox. It starts with the Rocket, Roger Clemens, MVP, 7-time Cy Young winner, 2-time pitching Triple Crown winner, 11-time All Star. The accolades for Clemens obviously doesn't really need an introduction. 7 times the lowest ERA in the league. Him and Pedro Martinez atop that rotation is what Red Sox fans have been waiting for, and now they're going to get it. Falling behind them now, Cy Young pushes down to a number three. You got Smokey Joe Wood in there. Red Sox going to have a very good rotation, but Clemens and Pedro as your 1-2 punch is going to be able to stand up against anybody. Rico Petrocelli joins as a shortstop. The Red Sox have gotten a nice job out of Dolby Moore. That they got Dolby Moore, old Negro League shortstop, very talented guy. But Petrocelli is going to be a factor there. Petrocelli can also play third base, and third base for the Red Sox hasn't really gone great for them to this point. So Petrocelli can certainly get some at bats there. Buck Freeman was a very solid turn of the century outfielder. He was like a one. I think it was. I looked up the. I guess it was earlier on today. Uh, Something like a 130 OPS plus. He could hit. Um, but the Red Sox outfield, like they've got Williams and Smith and Betts. That they've got Jim Rice now. So I mean, that's just going to be a tough spot for him to break through. Catcher is another spot where nobody has really taken that position by the reins yet for the Red Sox. Bill Carrigan, average, average at the plate, I guess maybe a tick below average, a bit better than average at throwing runners out from behind the plate. So Carrigan is certainly good enough to factor in there. But Clemens alone makes this a great draft for the Red Sox. And I think Petrocelli is going to be somebody who finds his way into that lineup, kind of taking the role that John Valentin currently has for the Red Sox here in the FSBL. I think Petrocelli is going to take over that kind of spot, and it could be he could be a bit more of a regular player than that pretty quickly for Boston. But again, the Rocket teaming up with Pedro as the 1-2 is a huge, huge plus for the Red Sox. Next, the New York Yankees. The Yankees, of course, have gotten off to a great start here in year four. They're trying to take the next step in their climb. The Yankees were bounced in the wild card game in year one. They lost the division series in year two. They lost the American League Championship Series in year three. Another step forward here in year four would get the Yankees to their first World Series here in the FSBL, and a team that's on the rise certainly gets a big pickup here. Sure, maybe he's not Roger Clemens, but Lefty Gomez is really damn good. Hall of Famer, 2-time pitching Triple Crown winner, a 7-time All Star, 2-time leader of, 2-time ERA leader, led the league in strikeouts multiple times. 26 and 5, 2.33, and a great 1934 season. Saw him in the top five in the MVP voting. Lefty Gomez is a real big get, and now the Yankees have three terrific lefties at the top of the rotation. It'll be Gomez, Ford, and Ron Guidry. That's a very, very formidable 1-2-3 punch, and there are several teams in the league who have a real struggle against left-handed pitching. So that's going to be a big help for New York. But the next pick is a really, really interesting one. Thurman Munson gets the call for the Yankees. And you want to why I say it's an interesting pick and not just saying that it's a great pick is because the Yankees have a good crop of catchers. They drafted Yogi Berra a year ago. So they have Elston Howard and Jorge Posada there. So there's a lot of catching there for the Yankees. And again, the way that I rate guys, because I don't want lineups getting bastardized with playing guys out of position and stuff, I only rate a guy as being able to play a position if he played that position at least 20% of the games in his career. So Yogi Berra, for example, is not rated as being able to play the outfield, which means he's locked in either being catcher or DH. Does Munson bounce Posada? as the backup there, and then you have Munson and Berra, one catching, one is the DH possibly. They've also got some good guys in the outfield, and you knew it eventually this was going to become a problem for a team like the Yankees. Um, the Red Sox have this to a degree. The A's will end up with this to a degree. Um, but the Yankees, obviously, the most prominent example of it, where you kind of get to an embarrassment of riches as more and more guys start coming in. You know, the Yankees, Mantle, DiMaggio, and Ruth aren't even here yet. Um, so when those guys arrive, what does that mean to somebody like an Aaron Judge? You only got one DH spot. So it's really going to be interesting to watch the way this all plays out. I think Munson ends up being with the big club. Posada goes down to AAA, and Munson and Yogi will be the guys kind of holding down the fort. Um, at the major league level next year. Chris Chambliss may very well end up being the backup to Gehrig at first base. I mean, Gehrig is there. Obviously, he's the reigning MVP. He's going to clamp that down. Can Chris Chambliss play over Nick Etten? Probably. Les Nunemacher is not going to figure into the catching. Lloyd Bruce was a nondescript Negro leaguer. But this is a very good and very interesting draft for the Yankees. I said when this started that it did not have the same Hall of Fame impact as last year's tremendous draft did. But the guys who, Hall of Famers who entered this year, are going to be very impactful. Here's another one. Bob Feller, Rapid Robert. I'll tell you, of just an all-time favorite of mine. I've told the story on here. I won't bore you with it now, but the opportunity to sit down and talk baseball at Wrigley Field with Bob Feller for 3 hours, tied to an old job that I had, among the life highlights. Just a fascinating guy, and just a life-changing conversation with him. He was fantastic. But that doesn't matter here. What matters here is the pitcher that the Indians are getting to be the top of their rotation. Hall of Famer, pitching Triple Crown winner, 8-time All Star, 3 times in the MVP top five, rack ink all over the place, led the league in strikeouts 7 times. Feller walked a ton of guys. And that kind of pitcher, as I have mentioned in in this broadcast and in other broadcasts here, that kind of pitcher has tended to struggle in this setting. Feller gave up so few hits, and he wasn't particularly prone to the long ball. I think he's ultimately going to end up being able to navigate that better than other high strikeout, high walk pitchers. A guy like a J.R. Richard, for example, who's been very middling here because of that struggle. Feller's just he's too good to be limited by that. Will it mute him a little bit? Perhaps. The degree to which it does will obviously be a huge impact for the Indians. But I mean, Feller again, just a black ink eh, festival on his baseball reference. Missing 3 prime years to military, and even so, his numbers there are just absolutely absurd. His 4 years before the war are among the greatest in baseball history, and he will now come in as the ace. No disrespect to Addie Joss, or Kluber, who's been good. There's a different level there, and Bob Feller is it. Um, the rest of this draft, Charles Nagy, 3-time All Star. Nagy, on the whole, really kind of ends up grading out as kind of an average pitcher. His peak is pretty good. He can be somebody who makes an impact here, but the Indians have a lot of guys like that or better versions of that kind of pitcher. Guy like Early Win. So Nagy's got a lot of guys to try to climb over to make an impact. He's basically going to be depth. Sandy Alomar at catcher. Um, could get into a role there. Victor Martinez, you know, it has been catching there. Martinez could become a DH guy. So Alomar could become at least the backup catcher to Martinez, if nothing else. But the pickup of Bob Feller is a huge get for the Indians, who are continuing to try to get over that final hump as three-time AL Central champions. So this year they've dug themselves a big hole that they're trying to dig their way out of. Um, and they've got a long way to go to get there. But the Indians, again, have won the Central three straight times. They made it to one World Series. They've been a very, very formidable force so far, and Feller will be key to the Tribe earning their first World Series title. We move on to the Kansas City Royals, who get a very strong pickup. At catcher Salvador Perez will join the Royals for year 5 of the FSBL. The Royals have gotten a nice bit out of catcher. Darrell Porter's been very, very solid for them. Salvador Perez is a better player, and Salvador Perez is going to get in there ahead of Darrell Porter. And that's probably going to be the end of Mike McFarland with the big club. You'll see Perez and Porter as the guys kind of driving that bus behind the plate for Kansas City. Perez, a 9-time All Star, a 5-time Gold Glover. He can kind of do it all. And so he's going to step right in there for Kansas City. The rest of this draft, Hippolyto Pichardo, a fairly, mid-level reliever. He could help. Um, Bob Stinson is never going to see the light of day for the Royals. Alberto Calaspo, good defensive second baseman, but he's not going to do enough to really break through here. Otto Briggs, a decent Negro League outfielder, drew a bunch of walks, played some pretty good defense. I don't really see him breaking through here, but he's again another one of those Negro League guys who was good enough that if his development track breaks right, can be a guy who contributes to the big club. But the big gain here for the Royals is Salvador Perez, their best ever at the position, and he will step in to try to bolster the Royals. An offense that just has never really been able to get it going through the first 4 years of the FSBL when he joins for year 5. Detroit Tigers are on top of the American League Central right now because they have focused on bolstering their pitching over the last few years. They got Justin Verlander. They picked up Hal Newhouser in the draft last year. And now they've added Tommy Bridges and Busy Trout. Not guys who are at that same level, but two very, very solid starters. Both of these guys were multiple time All Stars. Tommy Bridges was a 6-time All Star. Um, Dizzy Trout was a 2 or 3-time All Star. He won an ERA title at some point. When you go down to that fourth pick there, Bobo Newsom was an All Star several seasons as well. He had a very long career. He seemingly played for everybody. But Newsom has a high enough ceiling that he could be a factor down the line for the Tigers as well. What the Tigers haven't done is tried to bolster their offense, and their offense needs a bit of help. They're so focused on pitching right now. The Tigers need a couple more mashers. Their pitching is helping them tread water this season while Kaline is out injured. Kaline's expected to do back in about a month for Detroit. Um, but they need a little bit more impact. Another really good outfield bat would help them. Hint, hint, Ty Cobb, of course. Who wouldn't be helped by Ty Cobb? Getting Lou Whitaker at second base, like this. That there are guys in the pipeline for the Tigers who would certainly help them out a bit. But again, they keep their focus on pitching here with Bridges and Trout, just getting a ton of depth in that rotation, and the stockpiling of arms continues in Detroit. We head to Minnesota, where the Twins are also in need of getting their offense in gear. They pick up a guy who can certainly help that. Bob Allison. Again, the Twins outfield has not been very productive for the first couple of years in terms of thumping. I mean, Lenny Dykstra, if they've acquired him from the Mets, Dykstra's been very good. They've taken a big step forward in the outfield this year with the pickup of J.D. Drew. Drew has been terrific since they acquired him from the Cardinals last offseason. They drafted Heine Manush last year. He hasn't really clicked yet, but Manush should certainly develop into a fine player. And now Allison gives them another solid outfielder to draw from. Three-time All-Star. Bobby Allison was a Rookie of the Year. He had a couple of really good seasons in the early 60s. His kind of like super peak wasn't really that long. I want to say it was like 61 to 63 or 62 to 64, something like that. Bob Allison was a very, very strong player for the at that point. Yeah, they just turned the Twins from the Senators at that point. But Bob Allison certainly a very good pickup from Minnesota. They also got Byron Buxton to add to the outfield. Buxton, if you can keep him on the field, is certainly going to help out of Minnesota as well. Again, he's really going to add more depth from the start as long as Dykstra keeps on producing. But Buxton's got a nice ceiling to him there, and that can be helpful for Minnesota. They also get some relief work. I was always a LaTroy Hawkins fan. I just always liked the guy, and it felt like every time I saw LaTroy Hawkins pitch, he was performing well. His lifetime ERA ends up over 4. He was a bit above average in terms of his ERA plus. Um, After he left Minnesota, he kind of kicked around virtually everywhere, including one season where he was with the Mets, and he actually did a pretty decent job for the Mets the season he was with them. Um, in the early 2010s, 2012, 13, 14, somewhere around there. But when he started out with the Twins, Hawkins was a starter, and he was frankly terrible. But then they moved him into the bullpen, and something clicked, and he ended up becoming a very solid, reliable reliever. He'll be a big help for them there. Trombley, another guy who could theoretically help out that bullpen, but he was not at Hawkins' level. Trombley had a couple of decent years. He was another guy who just used to get trotted out there regularly. But with the other guys who they have in that bullpen, with adding Hawkins, with having Guardado out there, Glenn Perkins, Rick Aguilera, probably doesn't fit into that. So I'm not sure he's going to really make an impact. But LaTroy Hawkins is going to help that squad. There might be a mistake there. I have Wade Johnston listed as the Negro League pickup there as a pitcher. But Wade Johnson, he was a pitcher, but he was also an outfielder, and he was more prominent as an outfielder, and I have a feeling that I had him as a double entry on the Negro League player list because I believe that Wade Johnston is actually already in the FSBL as an outfielder somewhere. Um, I want to say it's like the Marlins or the Angels, but I believe Wade Johnson is kicking around. So that might actually be an error who the Negro League pickup is for the Twins. I got to check on that. We'll wrap up the AL Central with the Chicago White Sox, a pair of starting pitchers for the White Sox, guys who, again, should make a very immediate impact. Remember, these guys grabbed Red Faber a year ago. Again, kind of trying to follow the same model as the Tigers. It just hasn't quite worked the same way for the White Sox as of yet. But they have Ted Lyons. They grabbed, like I said, they grabbed Red Faber a year ago, who's been terrific this year, and now they add Seacoat and Doc White. Neither are Hall of Famers. And it's funny because off the top of my head, for some reason, I thought that Seacoat was, but he's not. Um, but again, ERA title, um, 120 games multiple times, just a very, very good pitcher, and he's a guy who will certainly crack into that rotation. Doc White as well, another guy. Doc White won an ERA title, I believe. I want to say that he did, unless I'm misremembering that. Actually, I have my other laptop open, so let me go and take a quick look over here and see if I can dig up Doc White. Bear with me for a moment. Yeah, so Doc White did win an ERA title. I thought I saw that when I went down the list. Again, 27 wins in 1907. Obviously, a different game back then, but even so, Seacolt and Doc White are a couple of really good additions. Another big addition, Paul Konerko at first base. They've relied on Zeke Benora, and Zeke Benora has done a nice job. He's had a rough first couple of months here in year four, but Zeke Benora has done pretty well at first base. But Paul Konerko is a better player. So Konerko will give them improvement at first base. They get two starters, at least one of which you figure will make an immediate impact, possibly both of them. Tim Anderson at shortstop. You forget all the other nonsense that went on with Tim Anderson, but Anderson had a couple of years where he was a really, really solid player. Anderson will always end up being best remembered for Jose Ramirez starching him in that brawl with the Indians. But Tim Anderson's a very solid shortstop. The White Sox have some guys there already. They've got Alexei Ramirez there. They've got Luis Aparicio there. So I'm not sure Anderson can really make an impact. He could. Anderson could make an impact, but this draft from the White Sox perspective comes down to bolstering the rotation further and getting an impact bat at first base in Paul Konerko. Short of getting Frank Thomas, that's about as good as you're going to get if you're the White Sox. Konerko will make an immediate impact to a lineup that, as of a week ago in the season, was the last in the FSBL in terms of runs scored. So we start the home stretch as we enter the American League West, and we open up with the California Angels. This is a nice draft here for the Angels. They get Tim Salmon. Salmon, of course, an institution out there in Anaheim. He was out there, had to be at least a decade. Manning right field, then the DH spot. 25 to 30 homers, 90 to 110 RBIs. Very solid run producer, good thumper bat. That will certainly help the Angels out there as they are lacking a bit in the offensive department. They also get Dean Chance. Chance, the 1964 Cy Young Award winner. So Chance is going to have a very good peak. If you look at his whole career, I mean, he was an all-star a couple of times, but for his whole career, his ERA plus, again, a very good, actually, 119. But that year in 64, 20 and 9, a 1.65 earned run average, a 200 ERA plus. So Dean Chance, a very good pickup for the Angels. Lee was a very good right-handed reliever for a couple of years to start his career, and then I don't know honestly if there was an injury or something, but he was out of baseball in 3 years. After that, he had a down year in his third year, and a couple years later he was done. Andy Hassler, a lefty arm out of the bullpen. Again, kind of middling, maybe a little bit better than average reliever. Sam Crawford, you look at that name, it's not that Sam Crawford, Negro League pitcher Sam Crawford. Also played the outfield a bit, but he was more of a pitcher. And again, a kind of mediocre starter, the kind of guy who, with the Angels right now, could possibly find himself competing for a spot with the big league club. I think he probably falls a little bit shy of that, but he's in the mix of the guys who can compete for a bottom of the rotation spot. He's as good as any of those, other kind of middling guys that they've got sitting down in AAA. But the addition of Salmon to help the offense and the pickup of Dean Chance, a very good 1-2 punch in the draft for the Angels. Intriguing draft here for the Houston Astros. I say it selfishly because I really liked this guy, and his career kind of took a bad turn. Mickey Thon is the top pick for the Astros in this draft. He will take over at shortstop there. He's better than Craig Reynolds. He's better than Roger Metzger. He's better than Adam Everett. Dickie Thon is going to get a crack there. The problem for Thon is that he's going to be another one of the guys with a good ceiling, but he's going to start off with not great numbers. He played several years, maybe almost a decade after his tragic injury. Remember, Dickie Thon led the National League in WAR in 1983. He was hit by a Mike Torres fastball the following season, missed almost the whole season. He was hit in the face, and Thon was never the same player after that. That 1983 season, Thon hit 286. He had a 127 OPS plus, 20 homers, 79 RBIs, stole 34 bases as a shortstop before, I mean, Ripken was breaking in that same time, before the shortstop offensive boom really took off. And Thon was a guy who seemed like he was about to go on his way to being a perennial all-star. Um, if Thon moved towards that peak in relatively quick fashion, that's a big get for the Astros. Dickie Thon was a very, very strong player. They also take two first basemen here. Yuli Gurriel. Gurriel had a 30 homer, 100 RBI season. He also won a Gold Glove. He won a batting title. But the Astros already have Jeff Bagwell, so I'm not really sure there's room at the end for Gurriel. And the Negro Leaguer who they picked up, Johnny Washington. Johnny Washington was a three-time Negro League All-Star, also at first base. And first base is the position that this situation happens the most. Um, because pretty much every franchise's, top guys at first base are all going to be solid. So you end up with more of a backlog there than anyone else. Outfield too, but you have three outfield positions to fill. So you see a lot of backlog at first base, and the Astros are going to kind of be in that situation right now. Bagwell has been terrific since he was drafted a couple of years ago. Nobody is supplanting him there. So Gurriel and Washington are solid enough players to get, but they just don't fit. Um, Alan Ashby, very solid defensive catcher. Nobody has really taken over that catcher's job in Houston. Brad Ausmus is there. Uh, Ashby can certainly take some time there at catcher. Mark Portugal, a very middling starter. Portugal was actually a great hitting pitcher, if you remember correctly, but that doesn't mean anything here in the FSBL. Um, but the pickup of Dickie Thon, if Thon reaches his peak, is going to be a really, really solid pickup for the Astros. Well, if the Astros weren't the perfect example for the glut of first baseman issue that teams can have, you know, come to them down the line, the Oakland A's are. The A's, of course, two-time American League pennant winners. They have rolled to the AL West title for 3 straight years. They also have Jimmy Fox at first base, Mark McGwire, and McGwire has been unconscious here in year four. I'm hitting for a significantly better average than his career numbers. Both his FSBL numbers for the first 3 years are very in line with his real life figures, but he's broken out this year in terms of average. He's hitting like 330. Not sure that'll keep up. We're only 2 months into the season, but even so, McGwire's having a great year. But you got Fox and McGwire if you're the A's. The A's pick up Jason Giambi and Matt Olson. You have no room at the end for these guys if you're the A's. Do they become trade bait at some point? Neither one of them, as excellent as they are, they're not supplanting McGwire or Fox. Um, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens there with the A's. As Giambi and Olson, terrific players, but again, my means of structuring this league is designed to minimize guys getting stuck, but it is going to happen from time to time. And this is an example of that. Those are two guys who are just going to have to just wait their turn until somebody gets traded or they get traded. The latter being more likely. Um, Jack Barry, kind of a run of the mill shortstop guy. He's not really going to fit in there. Garcia Massengale, a run of the mill Negro leaguer. Eddie Rommel is a guy. Rommel had more than 500 appearances in his career, and he relieved like three more games than he started. So he gets classified here as a reliever. Eddie Rommel led the league in wins twice He led the league in losses twice. He also led the league in appearances twice. He had a top five MVP voting. Romo had a very interesting career, but overall, he was a very good pitcher. A 121 ERA plus for his career. Romo is a guy who's going to fit into that bullpen very nicely. He's gonna, he's a right-hander. He'll go in there with Eckersley and Fingers, uh, and the rest of the guys who are throwing there are almost better than those other guys. But I mean, Liam Hendricks and Andrew Bailey and Justin Duchesne, like that, the A's just continue to get richer, even in a draft that just it's not that it's a bad draft, it's a bad draft for the A's just because those guys don't fit right now. McGuire and Fox aren't set to go anywhere anytime soon. So an interesting draft for the A's where Rommel might actually prove to be the most impactful guy for Oakland. Next, we head to Seattle and take a look at the Mariners, and this is just not much for Seattle. Stan Javier, Leon Roberts, Bill Stein, Tom Wilhelmsen, Giovanni Beal was a nothing Negro leaguer. He appeared in one season in the Negro leagues, so he's not really a get there. Dan Javier played forever. He could play all the outfield positions. He could run a little bit. He could defend a little bit, but he was never really a key guy anywhere. No black ink on his resume. Um, just one of those guys who kind of always managed to find him. So he played for half the teams in baseball at some point. Leon Roberts has one of the funnier baseball reference notes. I love when these things happen. Leon Roberts' 1978 season, 22 homers, 92 RBIs. He hit 301, a very good season, easily the best season of his career. But it shows up under awards that he finished 33rd in the most valuable player voting. So that 33 players got a most valuable player vote is kind of funny in and of itself. Um, but yeah, 33rd in the 1978 most valuable player voting, the Leon Roberts claim to fame. Just the Mariners, just they get nothing out of this draft. We wrap things up in Texas as we head to Arlington and the Texas Rangers, the Rangers who have been a surprise through the first 2 months here in year four. But the biggest reason I don't think that's going to hold up is because of the Rangers pitching, particularly the fact that Yu Darvish, who is supposed to be their number two behind Gaylord Perry, had simply just not worked out. Darvish has struggled. They're going to have a 1-2 punch next year because the Rangers are going to add Kevin Brown. Brown, a terrific pitcher, six-time All-Star, two times the ERA champ. He was very good as a Ranger. He actually got better after he left the Rangers, but a terrific season, 1992, won 21 games for Texas, led the league in innings. Um, he was just a very, very formidable force, and he'll combine with Perry for a nice little 1-2 punch there in Texas. The rest of the draft, Don Locke. Locke had some power, but Locke is the kind of guy who tends to struggle offensively in a league like this, a low average power guy. He's just not going to make enough contact to really make an impact in a setting like this. Lee Stevens, a decent first baseman, but with the Rangers having Teixeira and Palmeiro already on the roster, Lee Stevens just has nowhere to go. Ronald Odor, if the Rangers have a boxing team, he'll be better fit there. Just ask Jose Bautista, and who is in the league. So we'll look forward to those Rangers Blue Jays games. The Rangers aren't really set at second base. I suppose Odor, if he develops the right way, could end up throwing himself into that mix. Um, but I don't see him being a real impact guy. Newt Joseph, the Negro Leaguer, Newt Joseph actually can play a bit of second and third. Um, he was an above average hitter in the Negro Leagues. He might be a sleeper to watch here in Texas. He'd have more of a shot playing second than third with Adrian Beltre already holding down the hot corner and Buddy Bell in the fold as well for Texas. There's just not really a spot at third for Joseph, so Joseph probably makes more sense to try to get involved in the second base situation. there in Texas. With that, the year 4 rookie draft show comes to a close. I greatly appreciate you guys tuning in as always. I'm probably gonna try to get one weekend of games done. An American League and the National League game of the week done next Monday and or Tuesday. I'm gonna be away starting next Wednesday. For the better part of a week, going to see my son in Denmark. He's studying overseas in Copenhagen, so my wife and I are going to go pay him a visit, and so everything will be kind of dead on the channel for a week, and then we will get back and get into things hot and heavy as we approach the All-Star break and the second half of FSBL Year 4. But greatly appreciate you guys tuning in as always. Let me know in the comments, who you thought had a good draft, a disappointing draft, what have you. Bang that like button if you haven't. Subscribe if you haven't as of yet. And most importantly, everybody, be good to each other. We'll talk soon.